Hey there, welcome back to Well-Oiled Operations. Today I am interviewing a real entrepreneur, just a small business owner, just like you. Her name is Brenda, and she has a physical therapy, two locations actually, here somewhat in the Milwaukee area, closer to me. And she is somebody that is in one of our Powerhouse Mastermind programs. And I get to know these incredible men and women in the program. And I said to my team, I need to interview them. Like, they are so good. I want to hear their stories. I want to hear how they've done it, like how they've built these multiple 6- and 7-figure businesses. And what you're going to hear today is just a conversation of the journey and the pros, the cons, how she's planning to get through the recession, the calculated risks she's had to take, and just how that's kind of normalized now for her. So I can't wait to hear what you think of these episodes. We have a bunch of these coming out of just like real stories, real entrepreneurial journeys. So enjoy and let me know what you think. Brenda, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive in, I would love for you to tell everybody what your business is, like what it looks like right now.
Yeah, so I own a women's health pelvic floor physical therapy business, and we have 2 locations, and we have 5 different pelvic floor physical therapists on our staff. And so we pretty much specialize completely in treating common pelvic floor issues throughout the different stages of a woman's life.
Amazing. And what was your entrepreneurial journey like? Like, did you always start there? I know sometimes people have pivots. Sometimes it's like, nope, this has been it. So I'd love to hear like how you started, when you started, all of that.
Yeah, so I started my business as kind of a side hustle. So I finished physical therapy school and I was working full time,
Okay.
and really wanted to get out and do my own thing at some point. And so I started out actually just doing personal training, and I was going to people's houses at like 5 in the morning. And then after about a year, I got a really tiny office space that was one room, like probably like 12 by 14, and um, started seeing patients there. And that's actually when I became pelvic floor certified. So at the time, I was still kind of dabbling, and I wasn't totally sure if I wanted to go that route. And then I was in that space for about a year and a half when I decided to make the jump full time.
Okay.
Into the business. I left my full-time job. We moved into what is our current Hales Corners office
Okay.
here in Wisconsin. And that is kind of when I really struggled with, do I niche down or not? And there was a big part of me, I struggled with that so much because I still really liked treating other things, and I just wasn't sure. And so I think I struggled with that for probably about a good 6 months until I'm like, okay, we need to just like focus in and kind of get rid of everything else and just focus on that. So it was like a very slow transition.
Yeah, of course. Okay, a lot there that I want to kind of pick and pull apart. So I think it's really interesting to hear like the journey of side hustle. You did a little bit, then you started with a small space, then you went to the bigger space. I think sometimes it's easy for people to look at us and be like, oh, I need a building. Like, I got to go get, and it's like, I started in the backyard and a church basement. Like, that's what mine looked like, right? You started with a 12 by 14 room. I think this is so important for people who think I've got to have the big whatever, or I've got to go all in, or I've got to look a certain way. I just think it can be so risky. And the more we build our confidence, right, which is I'm sure what was happening with you, the easier it was for you to take those leaps. Like, yeah, still big leaps, but maybe not as big as they could have been if you just went full on. So I love that you shared that. Another thing I want to ask you is, were you just told you need a niche down? Like, did you hear it a million times? Is that like what made you do that? Like, where did that come from?
That's a really great question. Boy, feels like so long ago.
I know.
And like,
Okay,
what
so
was my
how long
thought
ago was
process
it?
then?
Like, how long ago was this transition? Was this niche down? Like, how many years?
6 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said it was a slow transition, like you were nervous to do it. Do you now wish you would have ripped the Band-Aid, or do you feel like, no, you needed to take that time to make that decision and feel good about it?
I think when I look back at it, I wish that I would have just like had that set right from the get-go.
Yeah.
I think it would have just been a lot cleaner and like a smoother transition. Like I wish I had in my mind what I wanted laid out a little bit better
Okay.
before kind of going in, but because it just slowly evolved from one thing to the next, I just wasn't as clear.
Mm-hmm.
However, I feel like at the time and the stage of my life and it just worked then, and I think I needed to kind of do it and really make sure that I was comfortable and okay
Yeah.
niching down.
Yeah. And I mean, when I look at what I've done and my journey, eventually it happened, but it's almost like, would I have really gone to the right thing for me immediately? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I think we have to really just figure ourselves out and what we're looking for. And sometimes that just takes time,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, and I feel like in my head, like early on, what I envisioned for my business is actually very different from what it is
Mhm.
now. I thought that I was going to have a much more like traditional looking practice where we
Okay.
treated athletes and we had a gym attached to it. And, you know, it was all sports based. Like that's so common in the PT
Right.
realm. And so, um, like I was like really holding on to that
Hmm.
and then realizing like this just maybe isn't what I want to do. And it's
Hmm.
also not really like what the market is
Okay.
supporting, I felt like. And so I don't think niching down was necessarily from one person saying I should.
Okay.
I think it was more like, is this a way to be different and stand out and
Right.
be successful long term?
I love that. What did your journey look like of education? Like, who helped you start the business? How did you know to start? Like, who did you ask? Like, what did that look like?
I took a couple business classes in college
Okay.
actually, which just kind of gave me like a base understanding
Hmm.
of some business stuff. I feel like you learn so much more outside of the
Yeah.
academic institution. But then I actually learned a lot from my husband
Okay.
because when he was in grad school, he's an optometrist. They actually had a private practice
Mm.
class that you could take. And so it was a lot more applicable to healthcare. And so I learned a lot from him. And then once I started the business, I actually used the SCORE
Yep.
mentoring program to really help me solidify my business plan and like understand how to do financial projections and that type of thing.
Hmm.
And so I think that was kind of like early on what really helped me
Okay.
learn the basics.
Yeah. Well, and I want people to hear, because usually you don't just go, I'll figure this out myself. You try to go somewhere where somebody can give you a little bit extra. So the fact that you had your husband, I just had Ken's cousin reach out to be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, right? Like, it's always good to either, if you know somebody, great. And if not, networking events or places locally, or now there's a million things online these days, right? There's so much out there. So I think it's really interesting to hear, like, where did you start and how did you get into that?
Yeah. And I think too, like now being at a place, it was kind of like that was early on. Then you kind of went through this growth period. And now I feel like I've reached this point where I've outgrown any like resource that I had. I
Yeah.
don't know anyone or have friends that are in the same position. And so that's kind of where then I started looking out, like, where can we go? That's how I found you and like trying to learn from people that have done it
Hmm. Yeah.
previously.
I love that. When you decided you wanted to go out on your own, what do you feel? First of all, did you immediately think, I can do this? Like, did you have that natural entrepreneur in you, or was there hesitation, doubt? I want to hear that.
No, I feel like I was very confident in that I wanted to do it.
Mhm.
Everyone told me that my idea to be a cash-based physical therapy practice was crazy. They were like, it'll never
Oh,
work. Actually, my score mentor at the time told me that she didn't think it would work and that I need to start taking insurance.
okay.
And I'm like, I'm going to try it. Like, I feel pretty
Yeah.
good about it. But I also feel like I did things, I didn't just like jump all in. Like,
Right.
I took it in steps because I feel like I've just been more calculated in the
Yeah.
risks that I'm going to take. And I just
Okay.
wasn't comfortable. Like,
So, for everybody listening, I think they can probably figure it out. You're in a situation where a lot of times you take insurance. So people come, they give you their insurance card. You're not bringing in any money right then and there. You have to then go to the insurance companies. However, you decided I'm going to be a cash only where they have to pay to come to me. So that wasn't probably that typical when you were doing it, which is why you were hearing a lot of no's. So it's interesting that you heard a lot of no's, but you're like, I'm going to do it. So where did you get the idea? Did you see this someplace else? Were you starting to hear that it was possible? Like, I always want people to know, like, sometimes just seeing it is like the idea to spark it.
yeah, there was one person in the PT world that was doing cash based and was kind of like putting out more business related
Mm.
content about that. And he had a podcast that I listened to. And so he was really like the first person that
Yeah.
like was kind of like the start of it, if you will.
Yeah.
Now it's a little bit more
It's
common to see
happening.
it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
happening, but
Yep.
like especially in the Midwest at the time, it was like nobody was doing it. And so I had to be like, well, other people are doing this in other parts of the world.
Right.
Like, I think we
It's
can do
not as
it.
crazy as it sounds. You're not like the
Right,
first person who invented it and you're like, let's see if this works. Right.
right, right.
But that still takes a lot to hear your mentor at the time say, I don't think this is a good idea. Other people thinking you're crazy. Like, what did you learn from that? Or like, what did you have to take from that from you to go, okay, everybody says no, but I'm going to try it anyway.
I think a lot of it is people are very risk adverse and it scares them. And people that are maybe not entrepreneurs or in the same stage, they just they're not able to like see it the same way, and so they want to protect you. And I think
Yes.
that's where some of these advices come from that people do that maybe aren't a bad thing, but it's maybe not necessarily the most helpful
Mhm.
or um, knowledgeable advice that you can get at the time.
Yeah. So good. So who are you getting advice from? How credible is that person, right? If you're just asking mom, your friend, your neighbor, and they're not in the world you're in, to me, it's the almost like, why would you even ask that person? You know what I mean? And of course, we definitely will at sometimes brings me up because we're excited and we're like, oh, I'm going to start doing this. And we don't even realize what's about to come at us, right? When they tell us it's a horrible idea, don't do that, all the things. So I think this is to me, this is probably my favorite part of this conversation of remember who you're seeking advice from. Are they a credible resource before you listen? Because imagine if you didn't, you decided, you know what, everybody hates this idea, I'm not going to do it. You wouldn't be what you're doing right now. And that's a huge part of your business model. So that's incredible that you were able to still move forward with that. I
Yeah,
love
I
that.
think it's like take it in, you know, consider it. Is it warranted?
Mm,
Is there something that maybe you're not seeing? And then if you still feel okay about it, like you have
right.
to make that decision.
Yeah. And I think at the beginning, I remember like I didn't really have a community. So I would go to friends, to family, and I would say these things. And now I couldn't tell you the last time that I went to family to be like, hey, what do you think about me starting? They would be like, I mean, they already think I'm crazy, but they think I'm crazy after it's happened, not like in the beginning stages when I haven't created it yet. So I think it is important to get a community where people are really gonna tell you an honest opinion, right? And they'll say, listen, I wouldn't do that because I tried it, and here's why
Right.
that went horribly wrong. Versus like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Okay, speaking of people giving advice saying, don't do that, I've done it, it was awful. Is there anything in your business that you did do that you would just want to tell people, don't do this? Like, I tried this, I did this, I regret it. Like, is there anything that comes to mind? And it's okay if there's not, but I'm just curious.
I think the thing I would probably go back and do differently, the very first PT that I hired on, I brought on as an employee, but in my mind, I wanted to have it built in so that there was some like motivation to do better. And so I had this like very complex pay structure with bonus and hourly. And, I didn't want to have to pay if it was not billable time. And in the end, I just think it's too convoluted. Like, I wish I would have just kind of been confident in it, done like a decent pay rate right off the bat, and had the expectations of certain KPIs.
Yeah.
And I think it just would have gone better. And I think.
Did you lose that person? Did they leave?
It did.
So I love this story. So you're saying you try to kind of protect yourself. You made something way more complex, but then it's not a win-win for them maybe, or they didn't feel the same way. So then they end up leaving, which then costs so much more than we were trying to save in the beginning. Right.
Right.
So how was that for you? I mean, obviously that was your first situation. How was it for you bringing on employees? Like, where did you start? Where are you now?
So when I initially started bringing on employees was when I moved into the business full time. I hired a front desk person part-time, and it was just the two of us for probably about a year, I would say.
Okay.
And then that's when I brought on my first PT. And it was right around that time that we actually jumped and did a second location. And so then with that, I had to add more staff to staff the second location.
Yep.
And then now I have about, let's say, like 3 support staff for each office, a marketing person, and then 5 PTs.
Okay. So knowing you had a second location so quickly, do you still love that decision? Would you have done it again that fast?
Yeah, it was definitely a growth move. Like, we were not at a point that we were like, oh, we're busting at the seams, we need a second location. I had the opportunity to, with a really good location, with a really good connection with referrals. Yeah. And so I made that decision to like, okay, let's do it. I felt like at the time I had at least systems in place of like, this is how we do things, which made it easier to replicate. But with everything, there's growing pains and you learn a lot. I don't regret it. I think it was still a good move. And the location's like, it's just a really good location. Definitely was a good move. I think it just was hard to accept that I was making like a growth decision at the time, sacrificing profit, and I just had to be okay with that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, we do these moves for growth. And then you're like, wait, I'm losing money. This just costs me more money, but it's a temporary cost. It's a temporary loss of profits, because that second business can start to pull from the first business. Right. But because you have systems in place and you knew what you were doing, right, eventually you can get them back up where you're like, okay, this is a good move. So, interesting. I didn't know how fast you did the second location, but yeah, sometimes it's just the timing is right. I need to do this now, or I want to do this now. So I was just curious.
Yeah, it was definitely quick. I think it was probably about like a year and a half in that we had the second office, and I was like 6 months pregnant with my first. Wow. And so it was timing wise.
Yeah.
A little crazy, but it worked out.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. Recession. I mean, some people say it's here. Some people are like, oh, it's not here yet, but it's coming. Either way, it's like, we're like right there. How are you feeling as a business owner? No, hearing people talk, you were not around in the last recession, correct? Your business
No,
was not open. Okay. So
no.
just honest opinion, honest thoughts, like, where's your mind at? What are you thinking? What are you, just anything you can share. And this is a place we can be super honest.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, maybe to some degree I'm a little naive, but I feel like I don't really get too worried about much because I feel like there's always something, right? Like in
Mhm.
I feel like if COVID taught us anything, like it's that, right? Like
Yeah.
you can plan and prepare all you want, but like stuff happens and
Mhm.
you just have to look at it optimistically and think of like it's just an obstacle. Like, how are we going around it or over it or whatever? How do we
Mhm.
get through versus a roadblock? And so I feel like I've looked at the recession the same way.
Yeah.
And I feel like at least the nice thing with the recession is like we can see this happening. Like, you know,
Yeah. Pandemic was a little,
we saw like 2 years ago when they're just handing out cash. You're
yeah.
like, well, we're going to be in a recession at
Yeah.
some point. And so
And I actually, for your type of business, I would almost say that a pandemic would be harder than a recession. Were you emergency? Were you essential? Were you able to stay open?
we were, but we
Okay.
lost about like
I'm sure.
80% of our
Yeah.
caseload like in a
Okay.
week.
So
So
I would assume a pandemic would be more difficult than a recession because you're most likely not losing 80% of your people.
probably not.
Okay.
I would
So at least
hope not.
like, okay, we got through that. We can get through this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like, I mean, I've definitely been trying to be strategic coming into it
Yes.
too. So we actually just kind of revamped things here a little bit with
Okay.
what we're doing in terms of our product. We just significantly increased prices because I want to make sure that we are giving quality
Mhm.
and trying to really capture the market that is going to value that because I feel like that's going to help us get through a recession.
Yeah.
It's going to be the people that can still afford to come here, will still value it and
Yep.
still value spending the money at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I like this mindset. Like, to me, when you're saying like, maybe I'm a little naive, sometimes I think being naive it can be a good thing because if you're so focused on it and that's all you can see, it's like you will start to sabotage without even knowing it. So obviously we're aware you are doing things already, you're thinking about it, but you're not obsessing over it. And I want people to hear that part because there are some people definitely obsessed. They're worried. They are making crazy decisions already and nothing has happened. Like they haven't lost people, right? Like nothing's going on. And all of a sudden they start to do things where they're the ones hurting their business, right? They actually say even just talking about the recession like sparks a recession because people start to get scared.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay. Any like maybe I'll end with this. Best piece of advice maybe you've gotten over the years. It could be from your mom, like just anything that like you heard one time, it stuck with you. And like that will stay with you.
Good question.
Or a learning lesson.
I would say probably the best piece of advice is that if when you're making business decisions, it should scare you a little bit. Like doing kind of like taking risks as entrepreneurs, like we take risks and they just need to be calculated risks. And so if it scares you to some degree, but you've done, every calculation that you need to for it and really thought it through, then that means that you're not just blindly taking risks and you're not just being what's the word? Impulsive. You're not being impulsive with things. You're not being frivolous. Like, if you don't have that fear and if it doesn't, scare you a little bit,
Yeah.
to pull the trigger, then maybe you need to kind of reassess where you're at and how you're making decisions. So
Mhm.
I try to remember that anytime I'm about to do something big and I'm like, okay, yep, yeah, that fear is
Yeah.
there a little bit. Okay.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, I love this so much. Thank you just for coming on, Brenda. I just wanted people to hear like real business owners doing this, going through it, all the things. It was so good. If somebody happens to be local to Hugh here in Wisconsin, can you say like your locations or your website or just anything like that?
Yeah, so we are kind of in the greater Milwaukee area. So we have offices in Hills Corners and Wauwatosa. Our business is Revitalize Physical Therapy. So you can find us at revitalize-pt.com or on social at Revitalize PT.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here and thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.